This is Talking With, Brian Lamb's conversation with historian Douglas Brinkley. Episode 3 starts after this.
Back to the fact that you wrote your dissertation, but how did you physically get Yale to say, we'll publish it? Did you talk to somebody?
Just sent him the manuscript, but it had a recommendation from a Yale professor. Gaddis Smith recommended to Yale Press that they look at it. He didn't have the power to say publish it, but he was a pretty big professor in my field.
Do you remember how many copies they printed?
I would guess, I don't know, but let's say 10,000.
Did you sell any?
No, not much. I mean, the New York Times got, anytime you get it was a glowing review in the New York Times, people buy off of that. So for a university press book, it got distributed, meaning in those days, the Borders of the world, so it got out there. I would see it in bookstores and was thrilled.
Can you remember how you felt that time as you're getting published by Yale and you're getting reviewed in the New York Times? How big a deal was that?
Unbelievable. And now I was hooked. I was going to keep going because I realized through the epiphany I had when I was doing research on Acheson is I was staying in renting a flat in New Haven, and I went to see the Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan in concert while I was researching, and it was so hot, and I got so bored, and I had been waiting for a month for this concert, and my friends or people I went with were just drinking and partying, and I just realized I'm in New Haven, and I've been slacking. I'm not working hard enough on my book. So next day, I just got into a kind of, I became a monk. All I did was focus on, I've got to get this done, that this is it. And I learned that it's a trade, book writing. It's like being a bricklayer or a plumber. Like a historian is a tradesperson. And you have to learn your trade, how properly use footnotes, how to pivot, keep chronology going. Some of it's simple, but you've got to learn how to frame it. And so that book was hard, but I framed it. It did well, and now I realize, wow, with that I can do more and better books. And so I started embarking on Driven Patriot, The Life and Times of James Forrestal, who was our Secretary of Navy in World War II and America's first Secretary of Defense. You could see I'm working in the realm of Acheson, Forrestal, the kind of foreign policy makers. That's what I was interested in, U.S. diplomatic history. I got to know Paul H. Nitze pretty well.
Secretary of Navy?
Yeah, he was super kind to me. I'd go to the Cosmos Club and things. We'd talk. I did a conference on Dean Acheson, and he'd write the introduction for the book for me, and he would blurb my books.
When did Acheson die?
Acheson died like 69. No, I'm sorry. Acheson died 71, I believe.
So you didn't know him?
No, I didn't know him. I might have that date wrong. He met Nixon in that period, though, in the Nixon years.
Go back to, as long as you've walked into the writing thing, what have you developed as the way you go about writing? I want to know the atmosphere you set up in. Do you go longhand, computer, speed? Who do you have read it? All that kind of thing. Give us that background. It's
all evolved some. I would just say with one of the misnomers that sort of surfaces online is that I've noticed that Stephen Ambrose was my mentor. He was not. I did not know Stephen Ambrose when I did my undergrad, master's, doctorate. Jules Davids was the person who helped me at Georgetown, and then a man named Townsend Hoopes, who was Under Secretary of the Air Force for Lyndon Johnson, was a Marine who fought at Iwo Jima, who he won the Bancroft Prize for History for writing The Devil and John Foster Dulles. He wrote a Vietnam book called The Limits of Intervention that won every award you can imagine. He lived here in Chevy Chase, and we embarked as a team together to write the biography of Forrestal. And I learned a lot from Townsend Hoopes. He was from Duluth, Minnesota, and was quarterback of Yale football team. and he knew everybody. He later became head of the American Publishers Association, and we worked on Forrestal a lot, and he knew Forrestal's story very well because he had been in the Air Force, Undersecretary of the Air Force, and he understood how the Pentagon worked, and I didn't, but I got introduced to all sorts of people. His best friend, Hoopes, was Zygmunt Brzezinski, and so I would go over for dinner with Brzezinski and Najib Halabib, and, we would, talk about world affairs and all. It was like a tutorial, and I then got a job and taught for a year at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Taught for a year?
Year, five. I had to do 10 classes, and I did Western civilization.
10 total classes?
Yeah. And in teaching early morning, they just used me as young, to help. But that was hard because I had to then learn Zola and Proust and things to put into these classes that I was doing on Western Civ.
And let me go back, though. Do you teach every day, or did you just teach a total of 10 classes?
No, I would teach all week long, regular. Now I'm down to 2 classes a semester.
But this would be 5 classes a day?
Semester. Well, they miss some days, but 5 a semester.
But go back to your habits of writing, the atmosphere in which you were writing. Where do you write?
I've written. I am unusual that I like music when I'm writing, particularly jazz, but I can venture in other things. It motivates me. Hearing the music gets me going. Coffee, music. I tend to be a little restless, so if I have a writing day, I will write at 3 different locations.
Give me an example.
My
where?
Desk, for some.
In Austin, at your desk in your house.
That's my starting point.
Longhand or computer?
Mainly longhand for first drafting, so let's say longhand, but then I will go to a coffee shop that's not busy and sit and or a diner and sit and work for 3 hours, just hog a booth and leave a big tip, and then I'll exercise and take some time off, and then in the evenings I'll do another 2 or 3 hours. So in the end, I try to, no matter what, work 8-9 hours a day on a book.
But where do you bring in your material, all of the stuff you've researched?
Each book's different, but I carry it in bags with me when I go to the diner. I'm a cartoon character carrying like 10 books into a diner, flipping them, all around, carrying, even on airplanes, it's like bags of bricks. I'm still bringing books. I don't like Kindle. I like the original books. And also, I'm often having to find really obscure books. I used to get them from the libraries and rare bookstores, but nowadays I get some from Amazon because you can pick up anything quickly. And I guess, Brian, what you're asking, to me, my attitude is no pages equals a bad day. If I don't have some pages written, and so yesterday, flying into Washington, I wrote on the airplane the whole way. I got into my hotel room and I did another 2 pages there.
Who translates that to computer?
Well, I do once it's on the computer, but once I do my original handwritten, either Anne or
Anne is
my wife, or somebody. I have like an assistant right now, a woman named Anna, whose dad's a friend of mine, who runs the Briscoe Center for American History at Texas. She's helping me through COVID, so I usually have somebody that can help me actually now look things up on the internet that sometimes I can't find. I mean, I'm only basic, but there are ways. I once had a young guy work for me named Mark Davidson, who now runs Bob Dylan's archive. And Mark would wear a hoodie and was like an IT specialist. Mark could find anything. It's unreal, the skill set he had of locating. If I said, I need to find Albert Schweitzer gave a speech that's not recorded anywhere in, Gabon, Africa, he suddenly will find it.
Where does he live?
He lives now in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he did his doctorate in musicology at University of California at Santa Cruz, and he got hired by Bob Dylan's people to run Bob's archive and to catalog, and he sort of has the skills of a curator at a major, like he could be working at the Library of Congress.
From time to time, not very often, but you'll see a story where they say Doug Brinkley has a team of writers that does all of his work for him. You want to deal with that one?
I never have a team. It's myself and my wife and one person assisting me. The team thing might be when I ran the Eisenhower Center.
In New Orleans.
In New Orleans, I was running a center. And so people, and this is when Steve Ambrose was getting big and also getting into trouble with plagiarism, Steve did. And I was there too, being very prolific. And so there's a feeling like there's this team at the Eisenhower Center. And the same with Steve Ambrose. Steve would just do everything himself, and his son, Hugh Ambrose, would help him some. But I think just people, when you're productive, people are wondering, how can you be so productive? I don't hear that anymore. I think at a certain age, people get used to that's what you do. I mean, I'm doing a book every couple years. If anything now, I haven't had a book out in a couple years. I'm getting the opposite. Like, well, what's going on? What's happened to you? There are advantages and disadvantages of being prolific. The advantages are I never take a break from one book to the next. And to me, the questions I can never answer, like how long does it take? Like I'm writing right now a book called Silent Spring Revolution on John Kennedy, Rachel Carson, and the 60s environmental movement. Well, that book began when I long ago did my book, The Wilderness Warrior, on Theodore Roosevelt. And because I'm learning how the National Park Service worked, I'm learning how the U.S. Forest Service works, I'm learning what the Bureau of the Biological Survey is, I'm learning about the Audubon Society or the Wilderness Society or the Garden Club of America, on and on. I was learning about all of that, doing TR, and then I did FDR, Rightful Heritage, on the same theme, and a book on Alaska. So I'm doing all the research. So even though now my book's dealing with the 1960s, I'm doing all my research for the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, because if you're going to go to a Bancroft Library at University of California, Berkeley, you might as well add a couple days in while you're there plugged in and research what you might be using down the line. And so, I have boxes and boxes of conservation documents. I actually am a collector of things dealing with conservation in the United States. And so I'm ready for the next one when I'm done with this one.
Go back to Georgetown for a minute. A master's and a PhD. Big takeaway for you? Best teacher besides a couple of the other teachers that you had there? Impressions that were made on you because of Georgetown and being in Washington?
There was a man named Thomas Dodd, his brother was Christopher Dodd, the senator of Connecticut. Tom Dodd became ambassador to Costa Rica, and he was a Central American specialist. And I loved taking classes with him because he was a great storyteller, and he had been an ambassador down there. And so I gravitated to him a lot. We had a friendship that developed, and I loved taking Central American classes with him. There was a great teacher I had named Walter Lacquer, who would, write about. I remember doing a paper for him, which I still don't have the answer to, which was whether John Brown is a hero or a terrorist.
What's your instinct?
God, it's just sort of, which way you look at it. He was a very deranged man, John Brown, and blood on his hands, murderous. And then you see the Harper's Ferry and his bravery and how it helped trigger the Civil War. And then you see people that I admire, Emerson and Thoreau in particular, backing John Brown. which makes you want to back John Brown too. And yet we were looking at where terrorism and modern terrorism, and yes, he was a terrorist. So Lacquer used to force an issue like that had no easy answers on on world history, and it was intense.
You've taught at Hofstra, Tulane, New Orleans University, and he ended up at Rice. He also taught the Naval Academy. What did you learn through high school, through Georgetown, through Ohio State, about what a good teacher is?
I never had to. I just believe in the term storytelling. I want people to lean forward and say, when I do a lecture, never to be bored. If there was one thing that does ruffle me or would hurt me, is if I feel I was boring. And it works for me because I'm not going to be able to educate students on everything. I'm still learning things every day, but I can maybe get them to want to read books and get excited. I'm trying to get them excited. Like, you're taking a class with me at any of these schools on presidential history. I want you to feel you know Washington or James Monroe a little bit or William McKinley, or at least want to follow the presidency in your life, reading op-ed pieces, maybe an occasional biography. I know presidents aren't going to be these students' lives, but I feel I make inroads, that they get into it and it's fun for them. And that's exciting for me. And because I come from my mom being a teacher, the teaching part's been easy for me in the sense of coming in and doing the lectures. It's the writing part so much harder. But I learned over time, Brian, that through publishers, good editors, when you get feedback on this is, my problem is tangential material. I turn in too long a manuscript, and an editor, a guy, Trent Duffy right now, but I've had different ones. A woman, Shelby Sadler, used to help me do this. Like an X, are you kidding me? Your subject is John F. Kennedy, and now you're going into the life story of Ted Sorensen, and then you're going the life story, and you start losing the narrative. So editors have helped me kind of keep it focused. Even with that said, a lot of my books are probably too long, that I reject cutting things out, because I always feel if I don't put those tangential characters in, they might get lost for history. I'm not, so it's sort of, I'm doing it out of actually what I think a noble cause, but I might be self-defeating myself by bringing so many characters into a given narrative that the reader might lose track of them.
Douglas Brinkley is an American historian and author. You can listen to more interviews with him by searching his name in the video library at cspan.org.